This story is about the night shift horror. I worked the night shift at a small convenience store on the outskirts of town. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the fluorescent lights overhead hummed ominously. It was one of those nights where shadows seemed to swallow you whole, reminding me of the 3 horrifying true horror stories I had read about. Around 2 a.m., the store was dead. I was scrolling through my phone, indulging in creepypasta tales when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. The sound echoed in the empty store. I glanced up, expecting a customer, but no one was there. I shrugged it off, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. As I returned to my phone, I felt a sudden chill. Moments later, I caught a glimpse of something in the far aisle, a figure cloaked in darkness. My heart raced. I approached cautiously, but the figure vanished into the shadows. I stood frozen, a chill creeping up my spine. The radio crackled to life, playing a haunting melody that resonated with the eerie atmosphere. Scary stories for sleep, it seemed to mock me. Just then, the front door swung open, and an old woman entered. Her wild hair and tattered clothes gave her a ghostly appearance. She shuffled toward me, her eyes wide with fear. "Help me," she whispered. "They're coming." Before I could react, the lights flickered violently, plunging the store into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, but the woman was gone. Panic surged through me as I turned in circles, feeling utterly vulnerable. Then I heard the sound of shuffling feet behind me. My heart pounded as I turned slowly, half expecting the old woman to reappear. Instead, a tall figure in a mask stood before me, the southern cannibal. "Caught you," he sneered, stepping closer. I bolted for the front door, but it slammed shut as if possessed. I pounded on the glass, screaming for help, but the store remained silent, my cries swallowed by the night. In a last-ditch effort to escape, I dashed to the back room. The darkness pressed in on me as I yanked the emergency exit open, but just as I did, a cold hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to face my worst nightmare, the southern cannibal, his smile widening. "I've been waiting for you." The door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. The last thing I heard before everything went black was his laughter echoing through the store, a reminder that some stories are more than just tales. I found myself in a dimly lit back room filled with dusty shelves. Panic gripped me, and I rushed to find a weapon. I stumbled upon an old baseball bat, its surface coated in dust. With the bat clutched tightly in my hands, I listened, waiting for any sound that might signal his approach. Suddenly, a low chuckle resonated from the darkness. "Running won't help you," he taunted. "You think you can escape the horrors that dwell here?" "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. I received no answer, just the soft sound of footsteps circling me in the shadows. Then it hit me. This was more than just a terrifying encounter. It was a haunting, one that would replay in my mind, blurring the lines between reality and the true scary horror stories I had consumed. I felt the panic rise as I heard the scraping of a knife against the floor, drawing closer. I dashed toward the only window in the room, praying it wasn't locked. My heart sank as I realized it was sealed shut, a trap meant to keep me contained. Just then, the lights flickered back on, and I caught a glimpse of him lurking in the corner, eyes filled with twisted glee. My heart raced, and I swung the bat, but he vanished. A cold breath on my neck sent shivers down my spine. The lights went out again, plunging me back into shadows. I felt trapped in my own Home Alone horror stories. Just as I was about to despair, I heard a loud crash. The door burst open, and a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, rapid and panicked. But the moment I thought I was safe, I heard his footsteps behind me, relentless and hungry. "Come back," he called out, his voice taunting. "You can't escape your fate." My heart raced as I reached the front door. I grasped the handle, twisting with all my might. It was locked. I cursed under my breath, scanning the surroundings for another way out. Then I spotted a window at the back of the store, my only chance. I sprinted toward it, each step echoing in the silence. I reached the window and threw myself against it, desperately trying to pry it open. Just as I managed to lift the latch, I felt a cold hand grip my ankle. I screamed and kicked, but he pulled me back. I scrambled to get away, but the southern cannibal was faster. I turned to face him, my heart pounding as I raised the bat, ready to defend myself one last time. "Let me go," I shouted, swinging the bat with all my strength. He laughed and sidestepped effortlessly, his movements predatory. I was completely at his mercy, and despair settled in as I realized I was trapped in this nightmare. "Do you believe in ghost stories?" he asked, leaning closer. "Because you're about to become one." Just as he lunged forward, I swung the bat again, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, his grin faltering for a moment. I seized the opportunity, darting past him toward the door. I felt the adrenaline rush as I flung myself into the hallway. The store was dark and empty, the quiet suffocating. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, rapid and panicked. But the moment I thought I was safe, I heard his footsteps behind me, relentless and hungry. "Come back," he called out, his voice taunting. "You can't escape your fate." My heart raced as I reached the front door. I grasped the handle, twisting with all my might. It was locked. I cursed under my breath, scanning the surroundings for another way out. Then I spotted a window at the back of the store, my only chance. I sprinted toward it, each step echoing in the silence. I reached the window and threw myself against it, desperately trying to pry it open. Just as I managed to lift the latch, I felt a cold hand grip my ankle. I screamed and kicked, but he pulled me back. I scrambled to get away, but the southern cannibal was faster. I turned to face him, my heart pounding as I raised the bat, ready to defend myself one last time. "Let me go," I shouted, swinging the bat with all my strength. But he caught it effortlessly, yanking it from my grip and tossing it aside. With nowhere left to run, I closed my eyes and braced for impact, my mind racing with thoughts of the horror stories I had once found thrilling. But as I opened my eyes again, I found myself in the store, alone, the darkness closing in around me. The last thing I heard was the sound of his laughter, chilling and echoing in the silence. I was left with the haunting realization that I had become part of the very stories I once read, trapped forever in my own nightmare. This story is about the Whispering Woods. The night shift at the logging camp was supposed to be uneventful. I settled into my cabin, surrounded by the eerie silence of the forest. My friends often told me scary stories about this place, recounting true scary logging stories that involved paranormal encounters and haunted stories that sent chills down my spine. But I was determined not to let their tales affect me. Around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. I stepped outside to take a breath of fresh air and noticed a dense fog rolling in, blanketing the trees. As I stood there, I heard a faint whisper carried by the wind, barely audible but unmistakable. It was as if the forest itself was trying to speak to me. The air was thick with a chilling scare and my heart began to race. Trying to shake off the unease, I grabbed my flashlight and headed deeper into the woods, where I often enjoyed the serenity. But tonight felt different. The branches creaked ominously overhead, and shadows danced at the edges of my light. I remembered the scary godmother stories which warned of spirits that lured unsuspecting victims deeper into the forest. As I walked, the whispers grew louder, forming incoherent phrases that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, partially hidden by the underbrush. My curiosity piqued. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find the remnants of some old logging equipment. But when I stepped inside, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Inside, it was cold and damp. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and the air felt charged, as if something was watching me. My flashlight flickered, illuminating a small table with photographs scattered across it, ghost stories of people I didn't recognize. But there was one familiar face. A fellow logger who had vanished 2 years ago. My stomach dropped as I realized I had seen him on the camp's missing persons poster. In that moment, the whispers transformed into frantic voices, all pleading for help. Panic surged through me as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I could feel the darkness closing in, and I frantically banged on the door, shouting for anyone to hear me. But the only response was the echo of my own voice, mingling with the whispers that now grew into a cacophony. "Help! Please!" I cried, my heart racing as the walls seemed to close in on me. I felt a presence behind me and turned slowly, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. Instead, I was met with a flickering apparition, my friend from the photographs. He looked at me with hollow eyes, mouth moving, but no sound emerging. Desperate, I sprinted toward the window, my mind racing with Home Alone horror stories that made me feel more vulnerable than ever. The whispers turned to screams as I smashed the glass with my flashlight, shards raining down around me. I crawled through the opening, gasping for air as I stumbled into the night. Outside, the fog had thickened, and I felt disoriented, the trees appearing as looming giants in the moonlight. I could hear laughter in the distance, taunting and cruel. Caught on camera, I thought, recalling the true scary stories from Reddit I had read, where others had shared their own horrifying encounters with the supernatural. I ran, branches slapping against my face, and it felt as though the forest itself was alive, conspiring against me. I thought about sleep paralysis and how powerless those trapped in it felt, realizing that this was no different. I was trapped in a nightmare, one that felt all too real. Finally, I burst through the tree line and into the camp, gasping for breath. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled into the main lodge, where the other loggers sat around a fire, laughing and sharing stories. They looked up in confusion as I crashed in, drenched in sweat and panic. "Where have you been?" one of them asked, concern etched on his face. There's something in the woods," I stammered, still feeling the weight of the whispers in my mind. The cabin, the voices. The room fell silent as they exchanged glances. One of the older loggers leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have gone out there at night. It said the woods are haunted by those who never returned. We thought you'd become another one of their scary stories." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. He continued, "Every night, people hear the whispers calling them deeper into the woods. Those who listen rarely make it back. You may have escaped, but you'll never be free of it." Chilled to my core, I realized that I had indeed heard their calls. They were trapped just as much as my friend in the photographs. That night, as I tried to sleep, I could still hear the whispers in my mind, a haunting echo that promised I was never truly safe. This story is about the Abandoned Asylum. It was one of those nights where anything could happen, and as I stood guard at the old city asylum, I knew I was in for one of 3 horrifying night shift horror stories. The place was infamous for its tragic past, filled with true horror stories that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to work the night shift. I was the only security guard patrolling the expansive, haunted stories of the asylum, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I walked through the dimly lit corridors, the flickering fluorescent lights created unsettling shadows against the peeling walls. The air was thick with the history of scary stories whispered among staff, stories of patients who never left, and spirits that wandered the halls. I often dismissed them as mere creepy stories, but that night, my skepticism would be challenged in ways I could never have imagined. At around 1 a.m., while monitoring the cameras, I noticed a flicker of movement in one of the old patient rooms. I leaned in closer, squinting at the monitor. There was someone, standing in the corner of the room. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Was it just a trick of the light, or was this an actual figure? My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight, bracing myself for whatever lay ahead. I approached the room, and the air grew colder with each step. I hesitated at the door, remembering true scary horror stories I had heard from other night guards about how this place was a nexus of paranormal stories. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room was empty, no sign of anyone. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a low, mournful wail. My instincts kicked in and I rushed down the corridor, flashlight in hand, illuminating the peeling walls and the rusted wheelchairs left behind. The wailing grew louder, reverberating off the walls. I turned a corner and froze. A figure stood at the end of the hall, illuminated by the faint light of an emergency exit sign. It looked like a woman, her hair hanging in tangled strands, her dress tattered and stained. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "Help me," she cried, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Please." In that moment, I was torn between fear and the instinct to assist. I approached slowly, heart pounding in my chest. "What happened to you?" I asked, trying to sound brave. But she didn't respond. Instead, she pointed to the end of the hallway, where the door to the old isolation wing stood, ajar. I hesitated, knowing that every scary story I had ever heard about this place warned me against entering that area. But I couldn't ignore her plea. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the door. The air grew colder. The wailing transformed into whispers, beckoning me to follow. As I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The air was heavy with despair, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I shone my flashlight around the room, revealing walls covered in scratch marks and remnants of old hospital equipment. It was clear this was a place of torment. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through my veins as I banged against it, yelling for anyone to hear me. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pleading and screaming, echoing the cries of past patients. I turned back to the room, and my heart dropped. The woman was gone, replaced by a reflection in the cracked mirror. My own face, pale and terrified. In that moment of horror, I realized I wasn't alone. Figures began to materialize in the shadows, the very spirits that had become the ghost stories whispered about this place. They moved toward me, their eyes hollow and their mouths twisted in agony. I could feel their anguish, their chilling scares coursing through me as if I were absorbing their pain. "Leave this place," one of them screamed, their voice piercing through the air. "You do not belong here." The shadows closed in, and I stumbled backward, desperately searching for a way out. I could hear their whispers now, a desperate chorus warning me to escape before it was too late. I sprinted toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, making everything feel even more nightmarish. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the old legends about the asylum. I shouted, "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to leave." The whispers intensified, turning into a roar that filled my ears. Suddenly, the door swung open, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted through the opening, not daring to look back. I stumbled back into the main hall, panting heavily. The eerie quiet surrounded me once again, but I could still feel their presence lingering just behind me. I reached the security desk, my heart racing as I fumbled to log the incident. I had heard scary stories about the asylum before, but nothing could compare to the horror I had just experienced. As dawn broke, I sat in my chair, the shadows of the night still haunting my thoughts. I knew I would never forget the woman's cry for help and the souls that lingered in that forsaken place. I had faced one of the true scary stories I had only heard about, but now it was my reality, one that I would carry with me forever.